Hello, everybody. My name is Gilda Ross. I'm the Glenbard Student and Community Projects Coordinator. Very serious topic today, a very important topic today. We have an expert who is going to guide us, all of us that are here, for this very sobering crisis in our community. We also have a former Glenbard parent, Dean Jeske, who will share his personal story. This is going to be a very jam-packed 65 to 70 minutes. Stay with us as long as you possibly can. Thank you for the gift of your time. We are so grateful that you can share this information from today and also share the resource. If you're a social media person, like us on social media, let others know that we're here free for everyone. Everyone is always welcome at GPS. And we're so grateful to the sponsors who make this possible, like our long-standing sponsor, the DuPage County Health Department, and Adam Forker, who is the executive director of the DuPage County Health Department, will be doing the introductions in 1 minute. Quickly, let me tell you about upcoming events for GPS. Tomorrow, a very important topic for those of us that are parents of young children. Tina Payne Bryson is one of our favorites. She has written a brand new book called The Way of Play. If you have a contact who is someone who has a birth to 8-year-old child, they don't want to miss this program tomorrow at noon and 7 p.m. And then next week, we'll be talking about what parents need to know about future proof. Tell us about the changing tide of work and how can we best prepare our children. That's on February 4th with Emma Goldberg. She is an award-winning reporter for the New York Times. That's at noon and 7 p.m. The next week, we'll be talking about a topic of great interest to parents. Amy Blankson is truly an expert in this area. She'll be talking about digital thriving, how technology and the future of happiness in a hyper-connected world, what can we do to benefit ourselves and our children on February 13th, noon and 7 p.m. We continue the month with a Glenbard South alum with a very important book called Peak Mind about attention and focus, enhancing performance. Should be an interesting conversation on the 18th at noon and 7 p.m. So thank you for sharing. Without further ado, you'll be putting your questions in the Q&A following Sam's remarks, and following Dean's remarks. We'll take as many of those questions as we can, time permitting, and let's get right into it. Adam Forker is, as I said, the executive director of the DuPage County Health Department, and he has the honor of the introduction today. Adam?
Thank you so much, Gilda, for this opportunity to support the GPS Parent Series and introduce today's expert speaker. The DuPage County Health Department and our prevention leadership team are proud to be part of the GPS Parent Series. We greatly value the expertise and learning it brings to our community members. And so we're so grateful to Gilda and GPS for their critical work supporting healthy families in DuPage County. And so today we're excited for our speaker to help us learn and talk about the changing landscape of the drug epidemic in communities across America. Sam Quinones is a celebrated journalist, storyteller, former LA Times reporter, and author of 4 acclaimed best-selling books of narrative nonfiction. His most recent work, The Least of Us, True Tales of America and Hope in the Time of Fentanyl and Meth, was nominated for a 2022 National Book Critics Circle Award. And his much-praised 2015 book, Dreamland, The True Tale of America's Opiate Epidemic, has been named to many best of all time true crime publications lists. And so, without further ado, GPS is honored and thrilled to welcome Sam Quinones for today's special presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Adam. Really nice of you. I appreciate that introduction. Thanks especially to Gilda for all the hard work in bringing me here. Let's get right into it because there's a lot. I don't want to miss, I want to miss as little as possible. I want to talk a little bit about how our drug world in the United States has changed, and the change has been profound. Many of you growing up were used to plant-based drugs, marijuana, heroin, all that kind of stuff. I would say what we have seen in the last 10 years, particularly the last 6 or 8, is that we are now fully in what I call the synthetic era of drugs. It's what I wrote about in my book, The Least of Us. This happened because of changes in Mexico. Mexican traffickers figured out that that synthetic drugs were highly advantageous to them, much more profitable, far less risk than plant-based drugs. Again, synthetic drugs are drugs made only with chemicals, no plants involved. And for years, I lived in Mexico 10 years, was a journalist down there for 10 years. When I was down there, the traffickers were all about the ground, the land, marijuana, poppies, all that kind of stuff. That has radically changed. Now they are global traders in chemicals. And the reason is very, very simple. All this benefits traffickers. It is not something that is demanded by drug users at all. The synthetic drugs require no land, no seasons. You could do it all year round. No plantations for helicopters to discover. Now, no sunlight, no irrigation, no farmers, none of that. Now, what really matters more than anything, the crucial thing is shipping ports. They have to control shipping ports because through shipping ports, they get all the chemicals they could possibly need to make the drugs that they are so famous for making. And these are two, of course: fentanyl, an opioid, just the most potent opioid we've ever seen on the streets, and methamphetamine. The methamphetamine out of Mexico has now has outcompeted all those Breaking Bad type meth cooks. We don't really have meth cooks in America anymore because they simply cannot compete with the enormous quantities and high potency of the meth coming up through from Mexico. So again, they're doing this year round because they have the chemicals to be able to do so, and they are producing these two drugs in what can only be called staggering quantities. They have covered the country with both drugs. By the time COVID hit, by 2020, both of these drugs were pretty much nationwide. There were some spots that didn't have much, but really it was all over the country. And again, this change took place because they saw the business benefits. The traffickers down in Mexico saw the business benefits and didn't. They easily switched. It was a no-brainer for a lot of these guys. And so all of this means that they now are creating drugs that are just the most potent we have ever seen in the greatest supply that we've ever seen. As I got into this and wrote about this, I really began to think, this is not about demand. This is about supply. This is not about demand provoking supply. It's the opposite. It's about supply creating, and in many cases then exacerbating demand by the just relentless flow of these two drugs. As I was writing The Least of Us, I began to study neuroscience. As a layman, I'm not a neuroscientist. And especially as it applied to consumer marketing. And one of the things I realized was that that fast food companies, soda and fast food and so on, that they are very aggressive about placing their products so that it's easy to get access to along the interstate for Burger King, in the supermarkets for Pepsi and Coke and all the rest. A key element of their promotion, of their marketing, is no friction to use, making it as easy as possible for your customer to use your product, whatever that product is. Social media does the same thing. Netflix dovetails one show right after the other. They're not asking you, would you like to see more? No, they're just giving it to you, right? Well, if you think about it, that's exactly what Mexican traffickers have done in the last 10 years with synthetic drugs, because synthetic drugs allow them to. There's no more seasons. They don't have to wait for the sunlight. They make it all year round. And so they have done that. The supply is, as I said, nationwide. It's unrelenting. There is, like with sodas and fast food, there's very, very little friction to use. Because of that relentless supply, and very, very high potency too, I need to mention as well. Fentanyl is the most potent opioid we've we've ever seen. Methamphetamine now comes in potencies that are the seizures that they make at the border, the DEA chemists test, and they're normally 97% methamphetamine, 3% adulterant. We've never seen that in this country before. The meth cooks were never able to produce that quality, that quantity and potency of methamphetamine. What it means is that it's extraordinarily deadly. It's very easy to make. It's very easy to smuggle, and above all, lower risk, I should say, not low, but lower risk, and immensely more profitable than growing your own drugs. And of course, you can be made year round. So the supplies outstrip anything we've ever seen before. What this means is, very bluntly, that the era of recreational drug use is over. Fentanyl is frequently found in many other drugs, in cocaine, marijuana, methamphetamine. That's one of the benefits to traffickers and dealers on the street. You can put fentanyl in almost anything. Small amounts, very, very cheap, very, very potent. It'll boost the thing. And what it'll also do is it will give you a much more faithful customer. A casual cocaine user uses uses cocaine with fentanyl in it. That casual cocaine user becomes addicted to fentanyl, and that fentanyl and that addiction to fentanyl means he has to buy every single day, numerous times a day. The other truth is that there's no such thing as a long-term fentanyl user. Not like heroin. I met heroin users that actually stayed on the street 20, 30 years. They're not dead. They don't have great lives, but they're not dead. With fentanyl, though, really, that's not been happening. People have been dying very quickly, within 2 years, sometimes within months. It's important to understand, too, fentanyl. I've had fentanyl. I had a heart attack 7 years ago. They gave me fentanyl. Fentanyl is a magnificent, revolutionary anesthetic when used in a surgery and operating room. And that one reason for that is because it takes you in and out of anesthesia very quickly. And it's wonderful. Anesthesiologists have learned to use it since it came out in the 60s. It's become a workhorse. It's used millions of times in surgery all across this country. It has allowed for numerous kinds of surgeries to take place, in part because of that easy in, easy out. But it's that very easy in, easy out kind of nature of fentanyl that makes it such a torment for addicts on the street, because now they always have to be using constantly. You cannot, particularly as the supplies grow and if they survive their first contacts with fentanyl, now they need more and they need more and they need to use it, and eventually you're using all day long. Of course, this is, as I said, this is all about what benefits dealers and traffickers. This is a bonanza for dealers, because now you don't have a guy who buys every weekend. You have a guy who buys 5-6 times a day, right? Similar thing is true of methamphetamine. Methamphetamine has another story that beyond simply its spread. The Mexican traffickers really began to take over from the meth cooks. The meth market in the mid 2000s, the aughts, the 2004, 5, 6, but really when the method for making meth changed in Mexico in 2008, 9, and 10. It's a long story about how that happened, but and it's a lot of what I wrote about in The Least of Us. But what is allowed to happen, this transformation allowed staggering quantities of methamphetamine to be made. Prices lower than ever, nationwide. It's an amazing achievement. They have covered the country with methamphetamine, even up into New England, which never had meth ever. And they've dropped the price by 80%. I mean, it's just, think about how that's possible. It's staggering. And all this began in 2009 when they changed the method for making it. As it marched across the country, though, this meth, this is what I wrote about in The Least of Us, was also accompanied by something else. It was accompanied because of its potency was so high. The purity, was so so high that it created rapid onset symptoms of schizophrenia, paranoia, hallucinations, the spreading mental illness issue and homelessness that we have seen all across this country. I believe it has been, in part, a major driver of that has been this radical new method for making methamphetamine, and then, of course, the enormous, highly potent supplies of that drug that have spread all across this country, driving people to mental illness. Methamphetamine, in this case, is no longer necessarily euphoric. Meth was years ago a kind of a social drug, a party drug, I guess, kind of. That's gone. It's all about very insular, very seeing, hallucinating cheetahs coming out of the walls, and the government has microphones in every light socket. But people keep using, even when they're on the street, even when they're out of their minds, because, well, why do they do it? Well, that's the insanity of addiction, right? I mean, the insanity of addiction is you don't care the effect on you, you just need that drug. So this is the panorama that we face really nationwide. It varies somewhat, but what's amazing is, used to be when I was first a crime reporter years ago, coming up, you would have in one region a certain drug story, 500 miles away, a very different one, 1,000 miles from that, a third very different drug story. What's happened now is like what corporate America did to the interstate, and how it's the same Burger Kings and the same Speedway gas stations from Maine to LA. Well, that's what the drug traffickers have done by manufacturing this colossal quantities of these drugs. So now the drug story is the same. Everywhere I go, it's the same. I ask people, what's the story? But I know what they're going to tell me. And sure enough, they go ahead and tell me, yeah, we got meth, we got fentanyl, or we got fentanyl, we got meth. And that really dominates what's going on in our area. One is more important than the other sometimes, but it's never a radical difference from that. So as part of this, the least of us, I wanted to dig in to the neuroscience of addiction, try to understand it as best I could. And it's a fascinating time to study neuroscience, because this is the golden age. We've known stuff about the brain that we never knew before. We have tools and technology to be able to understand it in ways that it just simply wasn't possible 20 years ago. And one of them, of course, is that our brains have mechanisms evolved over eons to keep us alive, obviously, to warn us of danger, but also to give us good feelings when we do things that build community, right? Eating together, sex, kind of storytelling together, It's about community. That's helped. Then, of course, there's the warning of imminent threats. All of that is, bold, don't run, don't ask questions, One of the remarkable things, though, I found, again, I'm a layman in all this. I'm a reporter. I'm not a trained neuroscientist. But on drugs, the other thing I found interesting was that the brain systems, while they're on drugs, the brain systems that have helped us stay alive, to which the human race literally owes its survival, though individually those systems on drugs betray us and aid in our demise. That's what dope does to our brains. It convinces us we can function with it alone, the dope alone, that dope equals life, drugs equal life, even as those drugs isolate us and then kill us. The more potent and prevalent the drug supply, the more chance it has to do that. And that is really the story of fentanyl and methamphetamine all across this country. You see people living in squalor, feces, beaten, raped on the street, in tent encampments everywhere. And uniformly, they will tell people, outreach workers and so on, who offer them services or treatment, a bed, whatever. No, I'm fine. No, they're not fine. They have simply had that basic instinct for survival is squelched. And every tent encampment is an essay, I believe, in that. In Los Angeles, they have a program called Reaching the 95. The reason they call this is outreach program, Reaching the 95. Why? Because 95% of the people on the street asked whether they want help and treatment and all these other services that people are like stumbling over themselves to give them. They say no. So how do you reach those people when their brains are so twisted by the drugs? At the same time, I have to say, one of the things that I really found fascinating was, as I got into The Least of Us, I began to study let's call it the legal drug supply, but it's not all drugs. What I found was that we have an economy. I'm 66. This has been in the last 20 years of our lifetimes, those of you who are old enough to remember. We have really seen the emergence of enormous quantities of legal products that are fine-tuned to swarm our brains and keep us using that product, or keep us watching, or keep us gambling, or whatever. So if you look at it that way, the Sinaloa drug cartel, which is the major producer of fentanyl down in Mexico, really takes its place along a long continuum that includes the Facebook software engineer, the casino designer, video game manufacturers, fast food, soda industries, Fox News, CNN, TikTok, Instagram, all of that kind of stuff. Then you get to the Sinaloa boys, right? We have ultra processed foods that have been made like they've been drugified. They're consumer products that have been drugified. High fructose corn syrup is subsidized. It's in so much that we eat. It subdues our feeling of being full, making us eat more of whatever product it's in. It's similar to fentanyl. It's so ubiquitous. It's very similar to fentanyl, which you find in cocaine and marijuana and all, and these fake pills coming up from Mexico. I think opioids in general have always been about supply creating demand. Our opioid epidemic, which I wrote about in Dreamland, Purdue Pharma, the Sacklers, all those companies making those narcotic pain pills, they knew that if you get the doctors prescribing, the drugs will do the job for you and they will create demand. A person who's using 5 milligrams now for whatever pain, real or imagined, is going to be using 40 in a year, and going to be using 80, and may 5 years later may very well still be on it. The truth is that we live now in a time of intensely potent and widely supplied substances and services that create addiction or problem dependence of one kind or another by their own potent and available supply, and have been fine-tuned to do exactly that. So chicken used to be, what is still a protein-rich meat, but now it's been mutated, mutated into something called chicken nuggets, which are 60% fat and salt, which we, through our evolution as a species, grew to crave because there was very little of it. And then you dip the chicken nugget in sugar, you have the trifecta of things we grew to crave. And now the difference is our brains are evolved to deal with scarcity, but now there's no scarcity. You can get this stuff constantly all day long. And I think fast food companies totally dominate that idea. They totally understand that. And simple coffee, little cup of coffee. Remember that? Does anybody just drink a cup of coffee anymore? Anyway, now it becomes a towering frappuccino. It's like a foot long, fat and sugar as well as caffeine, and it's offered in almost every downtown street corner. Gambling is now advertised on TV, in apps, by sports leagues like the NFL. It's in every sporting event. So now you can bet on your phone in the darkness of your own home. You don't have to go to a casino, be around other people anymore. Marijuana, hyperpotent marijuana, goes from being a weed grown by the side of the road, 3%, 5% THC, into this ghastly mutation that's 40% THC in the bud, and then 90% or something like that in the vapes. Social media. How on earth do teachers compete with a classroom of 7th graders, chafing to open those little phones to see what streak they can add to on Snapchat, or what hour of 15-second TikTok videos they can just dive into and never come out of? All of this is made so available. They understand friction, no friction to use, in this unending, potent supply. That friction, that reduction of friction to using is in our supply of illegal drugs, and it's in the supply of legal products and services that we have made, kind of drug-like. Makes me feel like we live in a time when traffickers behave like corporations, and certain corporations behave like drug traffickers. What we have seen as part of that is record overdose deaths. That is my feeling. I'm talking to certain neuroscientists. They believe that a lot of the legal stuff prepares people for addiction, certainly young people using very young, sometimes people whose mother was using some of this stuff, fast food and so on, while they were pregnant. That's to be debated. What we can see is that the levels of fentanyl are just so high. We are seeing record overdose deaths. And part of that, I also want to bring up this issue, is that we gave up in many parts of the country. Maybe Chicago is one of them. I'm not familiar entirely with all of what's going on there, but we gave up the only way really to counteract the alarming power that these plentiful powers of synthetic drugs of abuse have over our own basic instincts for survival. We turned away from law enforcement. Say, no, law enforcement's bad. No, believing that to use law enforcement was to return to the war on drugs. But here's the thing. The drug war did not have problems because we used law enforcement. It's because it had problems because we only use law enforcement. Using one tool to address a problem rooted in the enormously complex central nervous system is going to lead you to trouble. So just as supplies have created no friction to using, like soda companies, the drugs have become more potent, deadly, and mind-tangling than ever. And at the same time, we have taken to using law enforcement far less. There is a absolutely essential role for law enforcement if what you're interested in, as I am, is building a community approach to addiction. It has to begin with an arrest. It has to begin with rethinking jail. This is happening in some communities around the country where they are rethinking how to use jail as a place of recovery. Jail has really been a place of life mangling place. You just sit, you vegetate. A lot of things bad can happen in jail, but they're rethinking how jail can be used. I read a lot about this in The Least of Us, how jail can be used as a place to get people away from the street, away from those deadly drugs, and place where people cannot leave when the drugs tell them that they must, but not that they just then vegetate, that they then have access to recovery pods where people are all about recovery. And then after that, a whole continuum of care after people are released from jail. It's a radical idea to think about. In jail now in America, people are actually thinking, what happens to this person after he or she leaves jail? Before jail, they didn't care. Now, because of this, you're seeing this. It's a third way idea. On the right, they're like, throw away the key, who gives a damn? On the left, it's like, we should never throw anybody in jail because that was the drug war. Both sides, in my opinion, are really, really misguided. And I think the middle way is using law enforcement as part of a continuum of care that involves many parts of the community that also very much devoted to what happens to people on the outside. But again, all of this gets to the idea that what I'm talking about here has changed, is everything has changed. Right? Everything has changed. The way you think about drugs before and now, it just have to be very different. Historians have spoken in the past of American drug use cycles. So for stimulants for 10 years and then depressants, 10 years, this kind of cycle, that's gone. Synthetics have merged those cycles into one. There's fentanyl, a depressant, and meth, a stimulant made by more or less the same people, smuggled by more or less the same people, sold on the streets here by more or less the same people, and used and addicting and killing more or less the same people. That's happened in the last 5-10 years. Again, recreational drug use is over. So too, I believe, are certain ideas, traditional ideas of recovery. One is people need to hit rock bottom. Well, here's the thing, rock bottom and now is death. Okay, you got to get people for that. The other is they have to be ready for treatment. It's true. Readiness for treatment is essential. The big question is, where do you find that readiness? On the street with colossal quantities of this stuff coming at you, it's just not possible. That's why I think jail is really an essential element in all this, rethinking jail to be a place of recovery. And again, I write about this in the Least of Us. The truth is that users on the street will not develop readiness before meth drives them mad, and then fentanyl kills them. That's what's happening on our streets today, and that's what's a big part of what's behind the record overdose deaths over the last 6 years. What also is happening is that what we're seeing basically is that the myths of like 20, 50 years ago are now reality. You can die from one hit of meth. One marijuana comes drenched in fentanyl at times too, right? I remember when the Least of Us first came out, I was talking about some of the stuff, and I get radio hosts who would ask me, "Oh, this sounds like a more alarmist drug talk. This sounds like, the reefer madness era or something like that." And I say, no, that's what's happening. It's what's going to continue to happen. This was in 2021, into 2022, early 22. And I said, this is going to continue to happening because the myths have become the reality. You know what? I don't get those questions anymore. People read the headlines. People know people. It's not possible to sustain that this is a mythological stuff. The question, that I faced as a journalist is, what can I say about what we should do? So I'm no different from you. I'm worried about the world my daughter is growing up in. How do we defend ourselves against these powerful economic forces? The Sinaloa boys, but soft drinks and gambling apps and all the other smartphones. That's when it really occurred to me that actually that our best defense, perhaps our only defense, is repairing, rebuilding, strengthening community. Finding that way of, again, as I say, building continuum of care for addiction, very similar to continuum care for diabetes or cancer or what have you, that involves the community. Community is the most powerful force we possess as human beings. Helped us survive as a species. It's why we eat together, worship together. It's why we play music, play sports together. It builds community. It's why we've always needed storytelling, because it builds empathy for us among each other, Only, in the last 40, 50 years in America, we just decided, it's not necessary. We're prospering us. We don't need anybody else. We could be all alone in our house, get everything we need. But I think all of this we're talking about, it's the epidemic, even the pandemic, is calling us to understand that we are only as strong as the most vulnerable, only as strong as the least of us, hence the title. I will say this. There is some good news lately that I think has been remarkable, and people are still trying to understand it, I would say. One is, as I said, we've had record overdose deaths for the last several years, staggering, over 100,000, which is just an unfathomable number, honestly. But that because of fentanyl, because of the idea that you should leave people on the streets and fentanyl is not a problem, don't arrest them because it's a minor drug charge. Here's the thing. There is no such thing as a minor drug charge. That meth pipe, there's a minor thing. No, that person's going to smoke meth. In that meth is going to be fentanyl. That could very, very, very easily take that person into a grinding addiction and death. There's no such thing as a minor drug charge in America anymore when you have these kinds of supplies of fentanyl and meth. But what we are seeing now, last year, 2024, and perhaps because the supplies of fentanyl are dropping somewhat, we have seen those overdoses begin to drop. When all the cases for 2024 overdose death cases are counted, probably something in between 20 and 30% drop over the 2023 levels, which were horribly high. Also, this is also fascinating, I think. They just published a survey, the annual survey of teen drug use, when this asks teens who are 8th, 10th, 12th graders to self-report. It's online, all that stuff, but it's a worthy study. Shows that drug use has plummeted among kids. Now, this started during COVID, but what's fascinating is it has not risen since COVID's been over. You know, it's sticking low, which is an amazing thing. One reason it dropped is because during COVID, people did not have access to supply or didn't have access to ways of, so parties didn't happen. So you didn't have those social situations, and drugs are a social thing, didn't have those social situations in which you might start using drugs. So it was a roughly 2 year period in which that was really not happening. Get an entire generation of high schoolers then who really just have very, very low use, and we're beginning to use drugs. This is very much what we did with smoking, right? Why smoking cigarettes were like known to cause cancer, and people kept smoking. The way we stopped, or the way reduced the amount of smoking dramatically in this country. Education helps, but really it was making it more difficult to smoke. You can't do it at parks, airplanes, beaches, bars, restaurants, all of that. That's how you stop people from using. Access to supply. They still could buy the cigarettes, which are now more expensive than ever, but they couldn't really use them. And that's kind of what's happening during COVID. The access to drugs was still high, but they didn't have any place to use it. One of the things, I was speaking with one of the survey chiefs, and he was saying that one of the interesting lessons we believe is that if you can keep, particularly a 9th grade, 8th, 9th, or 10th grader away from using drugs for even a year, you have a great chance that he or she will not start up using drugs later. Another thing I think is the movement to ban smartphones in schools. My God, we're going to look back on the first years of the smartphone thing, thinking we just kowtowed, we just bent over for all those smartphone manufacturers, all those app makers. There is no way they should be in high schools. There's definitely no way they should be in junior high. But above all, what I began to find is examples of people finding purpose in life, in community with others. I began to focus on those kinds of stories because I believe that at the core, that's kind of where we find our way out of this. That's where we find the essence of this. Small towns. I began to focus on small towns. There's a story that I put in the chat room. By the way, the survey, there's a link to the survey I just mentioned there as well. There's several other links that you might want to check out. But I put the story that I wrote for the Free Press about the town of Hazard, Kentucky, one of the really badly hit towns in eastern Kentucky by this opioid thing. Coal mines closed on the pills. It was just devastating. They now are rebounding based in large part, significantly, on the new energies of recovering addicts who are now moving out of addiction, looking to use their energies, creative, optimistic, grateful, right? It's like fossil fuels, energy rising from decay. And so now in this small little town, there's no big factory coming in to save the day. No, it's all a bunch of tiny little businesses. 43 new businesses have started in Hazard, Kentucky in the last 5 years. 171 jobs. That means everyone's hiring like 2, 3, 4 people. Nobody's hiring 150, 200 people. It's just local folks supporting local industries, attracting folks to come back home from wherever they left Hazard to be away from. Small town economic development is changing. The attitude, the focus is no longer so much about shopping centers, factories, big box stores. Now we're seeing focuses on making life nice for locals who live there, attracting the smallest micro-entrepreneurial business ideas and nurturing them. And many, as I said, are in recovery. Some of the owners in Hazard, some of the employees. It's a remarkable utilization of this brand new natural resource that is the recovering addict in many of these towns. In the least of us, I wrote about the town of Portsmouth, which is a major part of my dreamland book, Portsmouth, Ohio. And there they have 4 new CrossFits. That's people coming together to get healthy. No longer thinking, yeah, it's a great idea to be obese and smoke and all that kind of thing. Now they're moving beyond that. Crucially, there are now two independent cafes. Independent cafes, not the Starbucks by the interstate, but independent cafes are really barometers of economic vibrancy. Economists ought to use them that way. I believe them to be, because that's where people come together now. They didn't have that before. They can meet each other, meet new people, work on their new business plan for their graphics art business or whatever it is, right? So finally, I want to say that I believe to an individual's finding that purpose in small steps. And one of the ways I believe that's happened is that it has to do with my latest book. And I can be very brief because we won't have much time. I wrote a book, I wrote two books about drug addiction and people trying to find happiness from buying a substance, right? I wanted to get away from that. So I wrote a book, it's gonna sound weird. I know it's weird, about the tuba and about marching band, right? It's not about people who are looking for happiness for something they buy. It's about people putting in hard work, postponing gratification, focus, teamwork, collaboration with others, achievement, working through failure to achievement, and not expecting to be wealthy or famous, but simply doing because you love it. Enriching, finding that fulfillment for something you create for yourself. That's what I was looking to write. And so the book is called The Perfect Tuba, but I wrote it because I didn't want to write about drug addiction anymore. But what ended up happening was the tuba and marching band are actually the perfect antidotes. It's like the perfect sequel, bizarrely, I think, really unexpectedly. The perfect sequel to books about drug addiction is a book about the tuba and marching band and the energy and effort without any remuneration, really, that you go through to develop those capacities, show yourself what you're capable of. Anyway, that's why I think we should feel hopeful. It's out there. The solutions are out there. Our ultimate defense, perhaps our best defense, is waking up to the preciousness of us together. Focus, hard work, collaboration with others, working through failure, cultivating a passion. That's the key to playing the tuba, to marching band excellence. That's also the key to addiction recovery and municipal recovery. After years of research, interviews, that's what this whole thing left me with. Anyway, I've gone over time. Happy to answer any questions you want to leave in the Q&A and whatever. Thank you very, very much for taking the time to listen. I'm eager to hear Dean talk about his story and answer your questions after he's done. Take it easy.
Sam is staying around. Thank you, Sam, for the generosity of your time to answer the questions that are in the Q&A. And without further ado, Dean, take it away.
Well, thanks so much, Gilda, and thanks, Sam, for your comments. Sam did an amazing job, sort of presenting a holistic view of these issues. I think my task is to personalize it a bit more. The thing that Sam said that really resonated with me is that the days of recreational drug use are over. That's a different age. That's not where we are today. And my son's story is evidence of that. So I'm a Glen Ellen resident. I have 3 boys who attended Glenbard South High School here in Glen Ellen. My youngest son, Peter, graduated from Glenbard South in 2017. He was an amazing young man, really, really smart. He was a National Honor Society, Illinois State Scholar, good athlete, captain of the football team, starter on the varsity basketball team. Had a group of amazing friends at Glenbard South. He then attended Indiana University, where he was a direct admit to the Kelley School of Business. Had a great 4 years in college, made another group of amazing friends, fraternity brothers, studied abroad for a semester, etc. And then flash forward to his last semester in college. So we're in now April of 2021. Peter had just accepted a job offer at a company in Denver and was really excited about that, which was an issue that stressed out a lot of young people, finding that first job. And on Monday, April 5th of 2021, his roommate came in and said, "Hey, Pete, I'm going to go over to some of our buddies' house, and we're going to kind of pregame before we watch the big game." That night was the NCAA men's basketball championship, and Pete was a huge basketball fan. And Pete said, "You know what? I'm going to stay home. I'm going to study. I've got a couple finals later in the week, so I think I'm going to stay home and study. You go off." His roommate went off to the friend's house, came back at about midnight, saw Peter's door was closed in their apartment, and didn't think anything of it, just assumed Peter had gone to sleep. Woke up the next morning, went off to class, saw Peter's door was still closed, just sort of assumed Peter didn't have a class that morning, so he went off to class. Eventually made his way home at probably 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon. So this is now Tuesday, April 6th, and saw that Peter's door was still closed, and realized, I haven't seen Pete in 24 hours. So he knocked on the door. Nobody answered. He knocked again. Nobody answered. He opened the door, and he found Peter lying on his bed face down, and he was gone. That evening, I was home at our home in Glen Ellen, and about 9 o'clock at night, there was a knock on the door, which was a bit unusual at 9 o'clock on a Tuesday night. I answered the door, and it was an Illinois State Trooper. The Illinois State Trooper asked me if I had a daughter that attended Indiana University. I said no, but I have a son that attends Indiana University. And the officer said, "Oh, can you give me a minute?" And he turned around and he walked down our sidewalk, he walked down our driveway, and he crossed the street and got in his squad car. I was left standing in our doorway, and my heart was pounding. I didn't know exactly what was wrong, but it sure didn't seem like it was going to be good news when an Illinois State Trooper is knocking on your door on Tuesday at 9 o'clock. He came back up our driveway, up our sidewalk, and he said that thing to me that no parent ever wants to hear. Sir, I'm sorry to inform you that your son was found dead in his apartment down in Bloomington. And that began the worst 24 hours of my life, the worst several months of my life, and candidly, the worst almost 4 years of my life. I pretty quickly realized that I had to call my wife, who was out to dinner with some friends, and get her home and try to get her home safely. I called her on her cell phone and I said, "Honey, you got to come home. I need to talk with you. Something's happened to Peter." She, as you can imagine, was panicked. Somehow she made it home. I told her what I knew, that Peter was gone. And as you can imagine, she was, I'll never forget the sound that she made. She was devastated and fell to the ground. Peter has two older brothers. They were living in downtown Chicago. We called them. They came out that evening, and we were all devastated. But at the same time, the four of us were thinking, like how could this possibly have happened? We have this beautiful, healthy, thriving, young 22-year-old son. How could he possibly be dead? And we didn't really learn much for several weeks, because that's how long it takes to get an autopsy done in Monroe County, Indiana. We eventually got the autopsy results, and for the first time in my life, I saw this word that I was unfamiliar with, fentanyl. And I the next day got on the phone with the coroner in Monroe County, Indiana, and that's when I first started to learn about this epidemic that's happening all around the country, in every community in the country, including ours. This epidemic of fake pills, fake prescription pills that are made to look identical to the real thing. So think Xanax, Percocet, Oxy, sometimes even Adderall. It's terrifying. And these are being made by the two large drug cartels in Mexico and brought across the border and sold to everyone, but in particular young people, high school age kids, college age kids, and they're being sold on the internet. And these pills are not the real thing; they're fake, and they're made with fentanyl. That is the only active ingredient in these pills. And what we eventually learned was that Peter, who did not have a history of substance abuse, did not have a history of addiction issues, he had taken a single pill that he believed to be a real, authentic prescription pill. And we actually don't know where he got it. We've never known that, which is hard. but he took a single pill and it cost him his life. And so as I was talking to this coroner from Monroe County, Indiana, I couldn't believe that I hadn't heard about this and I didn't know about it. And I'm a lawyer by background, so I did what lawyers do, and I just dove into this, and I was like, I got to figure this out. And I eventually learned a lot more about this. I got in touch with an organization that was started by a family who's had a son pass away, and they had started an organization called Song for Charlie. And their son had passed away under circumstances almost identical to Peter. In any event, it eventually led me to, for the past 3 years or so, going out and going to where the young people are and talking to them about this. So for the past 3 years, I've spoken to as many young, primarily high school students as I can. I've spoken at Glenbard South. Interestingly, I haven't managed to get into any of the other 3 Glenbard schools, although I've tried. But I'm going around the Chicago suburbs and in the city of Chicago, speaking to as many young people as I can, because it's become clear to me that there, as Sam has sort of alluded to, that this is an unbelievably complex issue. There are lots of ways this needs to be attacked. What I decided was my highest and best use was to go to the young people and arm them with information about this, because they need to hear this. They want to hear it. They're incredibly receptive to it, and they're incredibly respectful when I speak with them. But they need the information. They need to know about the fentanyl generally, and Sam is right. That is completely dominated all drugs, the entire drug landscape. The place where I think personally young people are particularly at risk are these fake pills. There is unfortunately a culture in this generation of taking and sharing pills. They're familiar with them. They've seen Percocet, they've seen Oxy, they've seen Adderall, they've seen Xanax. They sort of know what it is, and they have a trust for it that they don't have for heroin or cocaine or meth. And so, the kids I'm trying to reach are the kids who think like, well, that's really sad that people with addiction and substance abuse, that's really unfortunate, but that's not me. Because the truth is, any one of these kids, when they're in their first year of college and they're studying for finals and someone down the hall says, hey, you seem stressed out, I've got a Xanax if you want one, they might take it. And they need to understand, if a pill wasn't prescribed for you by a doctor and you didn't get it from a pharmacy, it can take your life. If you get a pill online, and this is exactly what I say to the kids, if you get a pill online, TikTok, Instagram, wherever, it is fake. It's not what you think it is. It is made of fentanyl. Those 2 facts are indisputable. And the only question that's left is, does it have enough fentanyl in it to kill you? And what the DEA tells us, based on the testing they do of the pills they seize, is that 70% of the time, 7 out of 10 pills that they seize have enough fentanyl in it to kill you. I'm going to stop there. My presentation is quite a bit longer, but I wanted to make sure I left some time for whatever questions you have for Sam, and obviously I'm happy to answer questions if you have them for me. But thank you so much for letting me share Peter's story.
So many people here are thanking you for your courage and your passion to spare families everywhere, because it is everywhere. And so when you came to Reality Illinois, the teen board to the health department, I can attest to this presentation. They are at the edge of their seat learning this information. You already have some people who are asking for your contact information. We'll make sure that you get to those people so you can continue to share this. So I really appreciate it. Sam, let's turn it back to you. You've got some questions. I see about our fentanyl, and you go ahead.
Yeah. First of all, Dean, thank you so much. I'm very sorry for the loss of your son. It's a crushing thing. I've just been in contact with a friend of mine from high school. I haven't seen him since high school. He looked me up, and because his son was addicted and his son died, today is the son's birthday, as a matter of fact, died a year and a half ago from fentanyl. I don't know all the details, but I'm almost, I'd be very surprised if it wasn't those pills that you were
Yeah.
referring to. And I've got a picture of some of those pills if you want to, on the chat. There's an image that I put up. I'm not sure how to open it in the chat, but basically you can click on it and you can see these things have, when I wrote Dreamland, when I wrote The Least of Us, I interviewed the woman who was arrested in 2017 in San Diego, who was at that point the most prolific smuggler of those pills. She was an American woman who went to Tijuana because she was a heroin addict, lived near the drug source, and they recruited her. And she was recruiting, she was smuggling 1,000 pills at a time. Now you're talking about seizures of hundreds of thousands of pills. That's a seizures, and it's a remarkable thing. And again, it's just about the supply of fentanyl that's just so huge. Carfentanil, questioner asked about carfentanil. Fentanyl was invented by a guy named Paul Janssen, to talk about this in the book. But Paul Janssen was one of the great scientific medical minds of the 20th century, invented many drugs. He invented fentanyl, but he invented many other drugs that have benefited mankind. It's a long story, but he realized that good chemists would know to be able to take fentanyl and make it into a variety of other kinds of anesthetics, a drug much more powerful even than fentanyl itself. I believe he cited in a report, in a study that he wrote, some 500 possible new forms of fentanyl. The underworld has figured out some of these forms of fentanyl, how to make them. And initially, fentanyl came from China, and Chinese chemical companies, to stay ahead of the law, would change their formulation. So it would be fentanyl, then it was cyclopropyl fentanyl, furanol fentanyl, all these different forms of fentanyl, because they were not legal. They were not illegal yet, and so you could do that. And so they began to ship some of that here. That's how fentanyl first came to the United States in this kind of very widespread way. Then the Mexicans began to figure it out, and they began to make their own fentanyl with Chinese precursor chemicals. And they really focused on fentanyl. They didn't want to make all this other stuff, all these other analogs, fentanyl analogs as they're called, because they knew they were breaking the law. They didn't really care about whether they were breaking the law or not, obviously. One of the fentanyls that is actually kind of a different little thing, but has found use, is carfentanil. Carfentanil is 10,000 times, ridiculous amount. It's crazy. 10,000 times more potent than heroin or something like that. It is used only as a large mammal sedative, rhinoceroses and elephants primarily. And it's used by veterinarians. The only people in America who are permitted legally to possess carfentanil are veterinarians, and it's zoos, people who have to care for rhinoceroses, hippopotamuses, elephants, all that kind of stuff. As well, though the trafficking world began to figure this out, largely first the Chinese guys began sending it, and of course it began to just destroy people. And you saw this in Ohio a lot. 14, 15, 16, right in there. That was the beginnings of fentanyl. That was before the Mexicans really had the control of the drug. Beginning in about 17, 18 is when that began to happen. Well, carfentanil was one of those drugs, but there were many others. There were, as I said, cyclopropyl fentanyl, furanol. There's so many, and some of them are enormously long names. But they have been found in the systems of other people. It generally is, to me, what the presence of carfentanil meant was that the Mexicans weren't involved in it yet. Because again, the Mexicans did not care that they were breaking. They knew they were breaking the law, and so they just made the easiest form of fentanyl to make, which is the basic fentanyl that they learned how to make. There's 3 recipes for making fentanyl online. You can find it pretty easily. And all you need is some of the chemicals, some of which are very, very easy to transform into fentanyl. If you don't really need to be an accomplished chemist to do this. But the carfentanil idea was one that was a big deal. You occasionally still see it, but what this gets into, and the larger point, I think, is really important to keep in mind, is that we are no longer in a time of plant-based, we're in the synthetic drug era. And so we're going to continue to see weird new synthetic drugs that have been invented by chemical or drug companies decades ago, when they never could make them commercially available, or they were too dangerous or whatever. So they just sit in the chemical literature, and they sit there and they fester, and they're forgotten until some underground chemist hired by drug traffickers, sometimes in Mexico, many times in Mexico, figures out, hey, we could try this. There's a whole family of drugs called the nitazene, Nitazene. There's about 5 or 6, I think, of these nitazene drugs. They've been showing up. And this is the nature of our drug situation. It's very, very different. If you're in your 40s, 50s, or 60s, it is radically different from anything you ever knew. And again, the traffickers have figured out new ways, and the pills that Dean was talking about were really just a way of reformulating. They're saying, we got all the supply. What do Americans really like? They really like pills. There's so many of those pills available. They trust pills. So let's form them into pills. And one guy did it, or a few guys did it. Everyone saw how big it was. And then pretty soon everyone's making those pills. Hence now it goes from this woman who was arrested, who I interviewed from San Diego, who was smuggling like 1,000 pills at a time, to now, if you see the seizures now, again, 200, 300,000 of these pills, weekly, frequently, that are seized. And that doesn't count, of course, we don't know how much is actually getting through, but it has to be a lot.
You know, Dean, when I heard you speak to the students, you told that story about two friends. One had no ramifications from taking that. Go ahead, tell us that story.
Sure. That's the crazy thing about these fake pills made with fentanyl is there's something called the chocolate chip cookie dough effect, where they're just mixing the fentanyl powder in with a bunch of filler and pressing these pills, and so you might have one pill that has like way too much, like a deadly amount of fentanyl, and then the other pill that's in the bag that you get from the dealer or you get online, is maybe only has a trace of fentanyl. I've heard stories. There's a group of young women who were studying, and they got some Xanax online, and they actually chopped the pill up into 3 pieces. So a single pill was chopped into 3 pieces, and they all just took. These died. The other 2, one of them was completely fine, and then the second one, got sort of sick and had to be taken to the ER, et cetera, and treated. And so that's the challenge with these pills is, again, kids are they're familiar with them, and there is a culture of taking and sharing these pills. As Sam said, the landscape is different. The very first step you take, it's the analogy I use is like, it used to be the drug world used to be a pathway, and you might start down it by smoking marijuana, and then that would lead to this, and that would lead to that. It's a minefield now, where the very first step you take, so someone just experimenting, can end up losing their life because of these pills.
Yeah, that's exactly right. It's a very scary thing. And my daughter, she's now a freshman in college. But when she was in high school, she was living at home. Every time, I know she's probably like this very unique situation, because probably no other reporter has done so much on this stuff, and she's heard about it since age 6. But every time she would go to a party, I'd say, "Okay, honey, sit down. We're going to say, I don't care what happens, that you are not allowed," and she is actually part of this generation I'm not sure it's so much me, but who knows all the reasons, but she's definitely part of this generation where the kids she's been drunk a couple of times and that's it. No marijuana, no nothing else. And it's an interesting transformation, and I'm hoping that it kind of continues because it's clear that those kids kind of get the point behind what the story, what's going on out there today.
Yeah.
Frequent conversations, not one big one and done. You gave us so much to think about, so much background. I am so delighted that you will both be here at 7 Central today. And so those of you, and there are a lot of people that have stuck around, please make a phone call, text someone and tell them they need to hear this information today. Thank you, everybody.
See you at 7
Thank
o'clock.
you.
7 o'clock. Thank you both. Great. So much. The era of recreational drug use is over. That is hard to wrap your brain around it. It is a new day. And between the wisdom that you've shared with us, Sam and Dean, I know, Lanny, you want to say something. So go ahead, Lanny.
Thank you, Gilda. My goodness, my words cannot compare to what these two gentlemen have done. In 2018, the DuPage County Health Department started something called the HOPE Task Force, the Heroin Opioid Prevention and Education Task Force, and we realized soon in the game that we had named it incorrectly because fentanyl was raising its head even back in 2018, and the polypharmacy that our coroner was discovering included fentanyl plus several other things. I'm not sure. We are building what's called the Crisis Recovery Center here in Wheaton, and with the hopes of helping decrease some of these alarming deaths and problems. And the 988 number is really important for people to know out there. But I'm speechless. Both of you gentlemen just blew me away. Sam, with your information, Dean, with your story. I lost a daughter back in 1994 for a different reason, but we're heart brothers, and I'm glad to be your brother. Thank you.
You have a question here about how can we do a better job with prevention education? And Dean, you don't even have to say anything. I know what you're thinking. Get me in front of kids. Simple, really simple. You're not charging a fortune for this. Just give me the opportunity. I'm hearing you. And we have a lot of watch parties going on tonight. People have emailed me about. But Sam, how would you take that question? And Dean, you as well. How can we do a better job with prevention education?
Well, I do believe that education is an essential part of all this, and that we need to be constantly talking about it. We actually, because of that, so far I haven't done this for the least of us, but we have done this. We published a young adult version of Dreamland I have around here somewhere. It was really for 8th through 12th graders. The idea being that through that you could ignite a discussion. I also think frequently these things happen at parties. That's why drug use slowed down among kids when COVID hit. I think, I don't know. It feels to me like very often parents need to take much more control of parties that are happening at their house. I would echo exactly what Dean said. Every time, my daughter's now a freshman in college, and she gets this talk still, but when she was home going to parties, I would stop her before she left and give her my dad's speech, reporter dad's speech, and say, look, nothing you can take will be okay for you at that party. If somebody gives you a pill, that person may not even know what's in that pill, you know? And or a gummy bear or whatever, that kind of thing. That kind of conversation, constantly talking about it, but also it does seem to me that one of the problems comes when we we don't kind of demand more of our kids. We want to praise them constantly for not achieving a whole lot. And I think part of drug addiction comes, you know, when you have trouble handling difficult situations in life. And maybe we need as parents to demand their kids just buckle down and you know, sink or swim in some cases. You know, I think you know, it happened far more in our generation than I think it happens today, frankly. So that kind of thing I think is also important. And one other thing I think we really need to do, and that is we need to be teaching neuroscience in high schools. There is so much available to be taught. It's basic stuff. It is not hard to understand. It's got a whole lot of really great visuals and images that you can use. Why we are teaching as part of a health curriculum in, say, 8th, 10th, and 12th grade, the neuroscience of your brain. So by the time you leave, you understand how your brains are working the way we understand. I don't understand why we don't do that more. They've got all the neuroscience out there and all the certain neuroscientists ready to do that. So
Jericho loaded up in the chat. We recently hosted Bruce Perry, and I have a sense you know about Bruce Perry, Sam. He's oh, you must take a look. He is. We had him. He was hosting. He and Oprah Winfrey wrote a book together called "What Happened to You." It's a shift from what is wrong with you. But he is a neuroscientist, and he spent his time with us, and we've loaded up the Q&A there, along with all the other programs on our YouTube channel, talking about, and he said the exact same thing, teaching these kids about neuroscience. We know so much more. We have to bring it to our children, the importance of and on us to, when as much as possible, to help with these connections with our children. It's, again, we said this afternoon, it's not one conversation, it's not one and done, it's ongoing. It's being the voice inside your child's head so that they know that they can come to you. So yes, do check that out. I think you'll find it worthwhile.
And I would say that once you know that, you're able to put that into practice. I found that once I understood neuroscience, all of a sudden I wasn't just buying stuff willy-nilly. I was looking at what was in it. I was understanding, no, how this would affect my brain. They have images of your brain on coffee, your brain on sugar, your brain on prayer, your brain on methamphetamine. You know, you can see how the brain is affected by all this stuff. I found that very powerful.
It's the end of a long day. I'm sure all of you are listening, and our speakers tonight are exhausted, and we couldn't be more grateful. Thank you, Lanny. Thank you, Sam. Thank you, Dean. Thank you, everyone. This is where we go hug the kids. So we'll go hug the kids.
That's right.
Thank you.
Do it.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.